Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi barakatuh, everybody. I am the host of the SOS, the Shout Out Show, Preacher Moss. Hope you are having a good day. We are taking a dipsy do in terms of our normal Throwback Thursdays. Our Throwback Thursday today is actually going to look at sociology, it's actually going to look at psychology, and it's actually going to look at the idea of policing, if you will. Now, when I say the idea of policing, it is the title that I need you to look at. Our Throwback Thursday title is Who Are You Calling a Super Predator? Now, for those who are not familiar with the super predator, the super predator was a theory, if you will. In the theory, it was leveled against young black men and particularly young black women, but mostly young black women, but it definitely affected our population of young black women. This is the linchpin of the Clinton administration. This was something that, for me, divided a lot of the voters for people when Hillary Clinton was running for president. She never apologized for this super predator theory. In fact, the person who came up with the super predator theory was a guy named John DeLulio. I think I said it right. A guy named John DeLulio. Now, here's what's important with this guy DeLulio. Listen to what he's saying. It was a theory in criminology, becomes popular in the 1990s. JT's on the show. He can actually attest to this because I started teaching in Milwaukee in the 1990s. I'm going to tie all of this together, inshallah. But he comes up with the idea, and he predicted that a large increase in youth crime and violence due to super predators. American lawmakers seized on this idea and implemented tough on crime legislation for juvenile offenders across the country, including life without parole sentences. Okay? It says the theory was criticized when crime significantly decreased in the following years. Now, here's the thing you should know. Crime decreased because population decreased. Going back to the 60s, if you ever want to look at this, there's a book called Freakonomics. And Freakonomics tied into the fact that birth patterns change crime statistics. However, we're talking about empirical data that is missing in a crime statute, and more so in a crime theory. When you present a theory to people, it lacks any kind of merit if it doesn't have, of course, empirical data. However, it tied into a system that didn't have empirical data. Now, we can say this is white supremacy and things like that. I just want to stick with criminal justice, or as the young lady said on this podcast, criminal punishment, because this is what this is. This is the framework for criminal punishment, and we're dealing with it right now. Because this framework, brothers and sisters, is not for guys who are who are incarcerated. The super predator is not about the adult predator, the adult potential felon, or even a high school felon. This was geared towards kids who are in middle school or on their way to middle school. The idea that you have children doing life without parole all of a sudden becomes acceptable. This is something that we say it's okay. It is collateral damage on the way to bringing down crime statistics, bringing down the numbers. Right now, we are in a space where everybody's crime's going up. Well, yeah, homicide's going up. But here's the deal. Homicide's going up all over the country, not in the inner cities. Meanwhile, all the other crime statistics are going down. Now, you can see right here where people are trying to focus the argument to make sure that you and I stay scared and fearful of asking the correct questions. Today, on the show, I do want to add some of the correct questions. Also, I want to give you some of the correct responses. And I say correct responses, not that they're coming from me, but they haven't come from anywhere in regards to who's going to stand up and take responsibility and accountability for a theory that the man, John DeLulio, actually apologized for and said it was wrong. But he set into motion, brothers and sisters, things like 3 strikes you're out, mandatory sentencing, life without parole, LEWOP, brothers and sisters, LEWOP. Mandatory sentences means that the judges have no ability to infer, interpret the law. and adjusted to the situation, you are just gone. So we're going to get down to the nitty gritty of this. I'm Preacher Mars. This is the SOS. Let's get it rolling. So, brothers and sisters, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is going to be one of those topics. Feel free to jump in. I know we did is American citizenship worth anything? What is it worth now? This is probably a carryover, but this is an ode to things in the past that continue to dog us now. You know, the whole idea of people, and dig this, the whole idea of what I'm talking about is that we've now had 2 generations for this whole idea of ferment. So we're going to get to it. First of all, let me welcome anybody who's come to the show for the first time. God bless you. We appreciate you. Thank you for spending your time. Don't be a wallflower. Get into the comment section. Let us know how you feel. Express yourself. And you know what? One of the best things about getting to the comment section is that you get your shout out. We believe that everybody has a voice on the show. We try to make sure that we hear everybody. Sometimes I'm a little slow with the comments, but forgive your brother. I'm not perfect. It's not a perfect show, but understand that your opinions are valued. If you really want to get into it, not miss the show, hit the subscribe button, the notification button, the like button, whatever button you want to hit. I'm already happy. I'm sized up because we already at 170 subscribers. You know, I'm happy. If we can hit 171 before kids go back to school, I'm a happy dude. Now, let's get back to this thing right now. And some of the people in the chat room today, some of the people in the comment section know exactly where I'm going with this. But I'm also going to go a little bit further. I'm going to try to lay out a fundamental understanding of what happened then and what's happening now. I know we only have 30 minutes, so bear with me. I'm going to try and be as clear and concise as I can. But please, I'm going to ask for your patience because there are a lot of things that have to be tied together, if you will. I have to pull a lot of strands, and some of the strands aren't big ones, they're little ones. So bear with your brother. Okay. So let me get to the stars in the building, the people that make the Shout Out Show. Let's get them up. What's going on, Sister Ree? Hope you're doing all right. I hope you're not too lonely. You got an empty nest over there. Derek's gone and Juwan's gone, but you hold it down, sister. If you need anything, give us a call. We are hoping that your health is improving. If you need anything, let us know. You are in our prayers. Who's Sister Ree? Sister Ree is the craft diet. She's a craft services director and the show dietitian. So big ups to Sister Reed. Thank you so much, sister, for supporting our platform. Next up, we got my main man, my little brother, JT, better known as Johnny L. Thomas. Now, Johnny L. Thomas, JT, I would love for you to jump in on this because you knew what this situation was when you were county executive working in Milwaukee. This problem was not going away, and it has grown tremendously since that time. In fact, the process has got a lot more entrenched, and it's got a lot more intricate, and it's got a lot more difficult for kids that go into the system to come out. So I'm looking for you to put some whipped cream on this tie. Put some whipped cream on top of the cake, some icing on top of the cake, if you will. All right, much love, brother, and peace and blessings to the family. Altaf Rashid, what's going on, brother? Altaf, it's 6 o'clock, straight up, straight down. Our Canadian ambassador to the show. Thank you so much, brother. Altaf, I want you to jump in if you can. Tell us about if this type of thing happened in Canada. If you had something like a super predator piece kind of jump out in Canada. I mean, Canada is this bastion of people love Canada, but you know, with diversity comes these problems. At some point in time, one group wants to be the boss. I want to know if that happened in Canada. All right. Thanks so much, brother. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sister Ike, thank you for joining us on the show. You must be feeling better. You must be making some money with that catering. You got to tell us something. We got to order something for the show at some point in time. Listen, hope all is well with you and your family. I hope that everybody is recovering. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Sister Reese said, all is well. Appreciate it. And we cannot forget, of course, there it is. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Our consultant producer, Sister Satana Whitfield. Satana, if the spirit moves you, let it groove you. You can jump on this show if you like to as well. Because this is one of those things where geographically, brothers and sisters, geographically, there were different responses and different applications to the idea of super predator. So work with me on that. Okay, here we go. Throwback Thursday basically goes back to the early 90s. In the early 90s, under pressure from Republicans on a get tough crime bill, Bill Clinton, who ironically was facing a lot of pressure for hanging out with a young woman named Monica Lewinsky, decided, brothers and sisters, that he was going to get tough on crime. A gentleman wrote out a theory, not a law, not a bill, but a theory. Not a law, not a bill, not a theory. The theory was called the super predator theory, and it's now referred to as the super predator myth. Hear what I'm saying? The super predator theory is not a super predator myth. It is a theory in criminology. Now, we understand aspects of criminology. And sometimes we don't understand aspects of criminology because we tend to lend ourselves to what's coming out of the mouth of people who frame themselves as experts. They're not experts. This was a criminologist who was also a political scientist. Here's where it gets murky. Poli-science is not an exact science. Criminology is a field that is built upon how you stack a case, how you stack evidence. So you say to yourself, how does a theory go to being law when the theory itself was not a law? In the 1990s, coming out of the 1980s, we all know that those were the crack years. Crack devastated a lot of inner city communities. Yes, it did. I stand here as a witness, but crack also devastated a lot of rural communities. The drugs did not stay in the inner city. That's where you got caught from. But the drugs meandered all over the place. Just like we're having a revisiting now, you'll go to some of these places in Ohio and these rural places in Missouri and Kansas, and you find that addiction is high from opioids and things like that. The treatment now for that is we don't incarcerate them because that super predator thing is a myth. Now we need treatment. Well, back in the day, in the early 1990s, many of you know that I took a job teaching in Milwaukee public schools. Coming out of the space of the crack era from 84 to 88, I'd gone home, taught for a while, did my job, decided to be a teacher in Milwaukee public schools, thinking I was doing my civic duty. What I ran into, brothers and sisters, was a well-orchestrated idea, not only amongst politicians, not only amongst law enforcement, but also amongst the teaching community, that we were teaching animals. We were teaching animals. And that the schools were not bastions of hope and education, but they were holding cells, pens, cages, if you will, for these inner city kids, and hopefully one or two of them will get saved. So the teachers weren't teachers, we were saviors for these inner city schools that were doomed to fail. Now, Milwaukee was not alone in this. The whole idea that the super predator was someone that couldn't be controlled, couldn't be educated, and even more so, the super predator in their treatment, I'm talking about the treatment of law enforcement around them, specified at some point in time that the children, once they got into the system, the parents couldn't save them. I was saying this to Satana earlier. The super predator theory, the most heinous thing about it is it fostered a feeling with parents that they were helpless. That it was just a matter of time before the system got my baby. You know, you hear guys come out saying crazy stuff like, prison saved my life. Wait. Prison saved your life? You mean there wasn't nothing else that could have saved your life before you went to prison? Like, go to class. Like, listen to your mother. Like, don't hang out with people who are probably going to wind up going to prison. It was that type of nature, brothers and sisters, that fed to this whole thing, that these kids couldn't be saved. And so the best idea, according to the super predator theory, which was proved to be a myth, was that we had to get to them early. Let me make my point here. When I was a school teacher, the idea of me wanting to be a teacher comes from the fact I used to be a counselor. And I counseled adjudicated youths in Washington, D.C. during the crack wars. And my philosophy, along with a group of other guys, is if we could just get to these kids a little bit early, we might be able not to save them, but to help them. To give them a different perspective other than what was going on in the street. The street's a cold game. We know that. The street's a cold game. It chews you up. It spits you out. We know that. But the streets, brothers and sisters, has another nature to it. The streets has a nature that says that this is the world that you live in. And you do have very finite choices about whether you want to engage in what my man is doing on the corner or what my man is doing over here. The streets produces people who are successful. And the idea of the super predator theory is that this generation of young boys, young girls, particularly Black and Latino, had no kind of efficacy on how they were going to be successful. Meaning, it didn't matter if they got good grades. It didn't matter if they excelled in sports. At some point in time, the conditions of which they were in would choke them and bring them back down to earth. And the conditions, if you will, allow for people, here we go, the conditions that people were dealing with allow for the criminal justice system and the lawmakers to say, lock them all up for their own good. You got to get them out of here, cut them out like cancer. Not understanding that while a young man may be confused and do suspect things or make poor decisions, it doesn't mean he doesn't have value to that community. Doesn't mean he doesn't have value to his parents, his mother, his brother, his sister. And what we did was we looked at the person, what they did, and under the super predator theory, we focused on their character as you were the thing that was wrong, as opposed to looking at all the things around them that were wrong. JT says, MPS used criminal statistic data to abuse young boys from making adolescent mistakes. Yes. Thank you, JT. My fight with MPS and my fight with the criminal justice system is that it was wrong. And when I left Milwaukee and I went to California, I remember dealing with a principal who was abusive. I'll call her name out. Her name was Miss Osborne, and she was a butthole. She was a butthole to every kid that was in special ed. And she taunted the kids, and she didn't want them there, and she let them know that she thought less of them than the other kids. And when she taunted a young kid, that kid went off. She went after him, and he couldn't handle it. He was young. He was in the 5th grade. He was dealing with a whole lot of issues. He went off. He hit the teacher. And that woman went right to the phone and called not the school police. She called the Long Beach police. And when they came, the vision that I had was that they grabbed that young man. They didn't put him in cuffs, but they put him in those plastic handcuffs, and they dragged him with his hands behind his back. And I heard her say, this kid is an animal. Not that you're a jerk, not that something that's broken in your core, your character, your moral character, but this kid's a jerk. So somehow the 5th grader is supposed to have more control over his emotions than you have. All I'm saying is there was a whole legion of Miss Osbornes. And some 20 some years later, brothers and sisters, hear me now. Now Miss Osborne is a politician. Now Miss Osborne is a cop. Now Miss Osborne is a judge. And Miss Osborne haven't changed a lick. In fact, we will sit up and talk about how kids are not educated and at the same time gut out every educational opportunity that they can have to improve themselves. All these kids don't work. Well, They would work if there were jobs, meaningful jobs. These kids don't study. Well, you cut the libraries off. It's the same thing now with voting rights. Black people don't vote. Yeah, it does get hard if you keep taking away the polling places where we do vote. You cut the hours, and this is the pattern, brothers and sisters. Let me tell you guys something. When a child goes into juvenile correction, all right? When a child goes into juvenile correction in many ways is probably worse than regular correction. Because in juvenile correction, they're not mature. The rate and the incident of violence and hate, it basically replicates and it represents the fact that these are not whole children. They're not full thinkers. Do you see what I'm saying? We know we put them in situations that, well, they won't grow up. It's not time for them to grow up. They're 13, 14, 15 years old. A kid yells out, who you calling a super predator? Guess what? He don't know what a super predator is. He just knows in his heart and his spirit it's not a good thing. And we always put this out here like this, brothers and sisters. You know, I've said these things about politicians. I said these things about education. I said these things about religious communities. I'm going to say it now. Too often, we stood on the sidelines thinking it's going to work itself out. We did. I know some politicians who probably risked their careers going to schools to find out what the kids were learning, to sit with children and go, how do you feel about your education? Better yet, how do you feel about your future? Those politicians are not along. They're not around anymore. You, like Kwame Brown said, you got to go along, get along game. That's what it is now. And what you see, brothers and sisters, is not just the Black children and Latino children who grew up in the process of the super predator theory / myth. On the other side, you had white children who grew up in the same thing. And guess what? If one group grew up this way, how do you think that other group grew up? Being fed a myth that these people somehow are not worth the time of day, that these people are animals, that these people are predisposed to crime. You put a badge on it, you put a badge on their chest, you put a gavel in their hand, and you put a gun on their hip. What do you think was going to happen? Althoff says, from the 80s to about 2003, we had something called the Young Offenders Act. Laws dealing with offenders between 12 and 17 that caused more youth to be charged. The amended Youth Criminal Justice Act in 2003 amended most laws. But it says we have less youth charged, and instead they're trying to get help outside the judicial system. Now, this is important. What he just said. Because we never had an amendment for the super predator theory because it was a theory. This is one of the few times somebody took a theory and they made laws about it. Hear me now. I mean, they made laws about this, and those laws are still on the books. All right, say fight the power word. Hey, what's going on? Fight the power word. I like you. I like you already. Let's see. Science shows that a lot of the brain connections for decision making sometimes don't completely form until the early and possibly late 20s. Yeah. Now, how are you going to make laws? And science tells you that these children are not capable of doing this. Hear me now. They're not capable of making decisions. Here's a hint that the kids are not capable of making decisions. A 12-year-old has not figured out a way to get a mortgage. A 15-year-old can't drive. Right? Now we'll keep the alcohol away from them, but we won't keep the drugs away. But we'll keep the alcohol away from them, but we won't keep the drugs away. We won't keep the conditions of poverty away from kids. You know, and I was listening to this morning. while I was running. And this makes a whole lot of sense, and it breaks my heart. Ibrahim Kendi does the Be Anti-Racist podcast. I encourage everybody to check it out. But he was saying that with the pandemic, now, before the pandemic, all this stuff is going on, Black people struggling, all this type of stuff. He said when the pandemic hit and it became incumbent that everybody somehow improve, however it was, through stimulus, through unemployment, everybody had to improve, brothers and sisters. Somehow, the United States government, even under Trump, found a way to turn on the spigots and let the money flow. What does that tell you? It tells you that we had all these resources here already. So we had the resources to fix the schools. We had the resources for healthcare. We had the resources to have programs instead of sending these kids, these juvenile correction programs, getting them counseling, getting them help. Guess what? Engage in the educational process, taking the stigma out of the fact that some of them are mentally ill. We don't even provide mental illness. When you go to a school, they have one psychologist and she's not there full time. She's probably servicing 15 schools in the area. And when a kid says that somebody's speaking to me in my mind, I don't feel right, I'm having bad thoughts about myself, they send them to the nurse. They don't send them to the social worker because the social worker is doing 15 schools as well. And by the time you get a psychologist there, that kid's done something, act out. Am I wrong? I wish I was. I wish I was wrong. But it speaks of, brothers and sisters, that somehow the powers that be have figured out a way to make sure that we stay in a constant stage of fright, that we stay in a constant stage of fear, that they are going to do something more to us other than what they've done. They will come up with creative ways to make us even more uncomfortable in how we live our lives, make our lives even more difficult than it already is. And literally trying to make existence illegal. Think about that. Trying to make existence illegal. Fight the Power says the money started flowing when data showed the white male was losing hope. Where you been all week? Brother, where you been? Come back to the show tomorrow. Fight the Power. Fight the Power getting there all kind of truth. JT's giving you guys truth. Altar's giving you truth. I'm just trying to hang in here with the rest of y'all. When white people were doing bad, they found the money. Negro been doing bad 200, 300 years. 200, 300 years, ain't nobody say nothing. White guy realizes my light's getting cut off. When a white man start playing Muddy Waters records, you know it's bad. And they still found a way. And these white folks still ain't happy. You know why? Because they had to give it to everybody. They had to give it to everybody. They had to give it to the black man too. Now, like $100 in a black man's hand and $100 in a white man's hand. It's two different narratives, brothers and sisters. I hate to say it. But my point is, getting back to what I was saying earlier, this whole super predator theory thing established a way of understanding false, a way of application of law illegal, and a way of dehumanizing people, which was immoral. And we're still dealing with it today. My point, brothers, is not to tell you anything you don't know, but it's Throwback Thursday. I want us to remember that. So when we see something with the George Floyd, remember that. Remember the George Floyd. Remember Philando Castile. Remember Sandra Bland. Remember Ahmaud Arbery. Ahmaud Arbery, and we still haven't heard when his case is coming up for the people that killed him. But my point is, brothers and sisters, that people built careers. They built institutions. They built police stations off a lie. And the man who came up with the lie actually had the audacity to come and go, you know what, I was wrong. I was wrong. And that probably goes into a whole nother thing when white people apologize, but he was wrong, but his wrong killed life. His wrong affected human beings who did nothing wrong except want to be themselves. except want to grow up and have expectations and dreams and want to do things. And his super predator theory, for lack of a better word, cut off the spigots on that. You know, they say in inner city schools that the most negative place in the school is the teacher's lounge. I remember a teacher in the lounge who said, I would never bring my kids to this school. And everybody goes, and I looked at the lead black teacher. She looked at me and I said, well, it's going to be me, it's going to be you. And so the lead black teacher, who was so kind, Miss Robbins, told the lady, and she told him on my behalf because I probably would have gotten fired. Miss Robbins said, well, why don't you go teach them white kids? Because you ain't doing a damn thing here. Well, I believe that. But Miss Robbins told me, and I will give her, she was a reading resource teacher at, what was that, 27th Street School? Not Mitchell. It was off of Tonian Center, 27th Street School. She told me, and I remember this, she said, you're in a war. She said, you're in a war. She said, you're in an unconventional war. She said, the only tools that these people can give you fight are love, understanding, commitment, and a thick skin. And not in that order. And brothers and sisters, as we look at it, going back to the early 90s to where we are now, we're talking 20-something years, really going into 30-something years. It's like we're still fighting the same fight. We're literally watching people cast aspersions on other people, whether it's the immigration down at the border, whether it's social justice, whether we have infighting about education, we have infighting about the purposefulness of Black families, Latino families. We're talking about the disappearance of Native Americans. We are still having the same fight, brothers and sisters. So my hope is that sometimes we just stop fighting, start having a conversation, and really begin to understand and look out and go, hey, man, who are the proponents of the things that keep this going? And I believe if we can do that, I think we'll be a much better service to our youth and much better service to us in resolving the fact that many of us, though I was a teacher, 20-some-year-old back then, that many of us who were younger still grew up with the scars of that cloak of being a super predator. So I want to give a shout out, Donkey of the Day, to two people. That'd be Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and the Republicans of that time. I was watching. Y'all did folks wrong. Hillary Clinton, I'm glad you didn't win. I didn't want Trump to win, but I didn't believe you. And sadly, we had an election of two people I really didn't like anyway. Did I say that? I sure did say that. I meant it too. You know, I think we need to get back to just saying how we feel too. This white guy put out super predator theory. He comes out, he says, I was wrong. He still gets to keep his job. He still keeps to keep his position. He still gets to go home to his family and his friends. Meanwhile, and you know I'm going with this, I've taught young men who are in that space, who are young elementary school kids going to middle school. And they didn't wind up at Harvard or Brown or Princeton or Yale or Stanford. They wound up in prison. Statistics. That's my show for today. Let's wrap it up. Let's get to our sponsors. Brothers and sisters, give a shout out to BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. Again, that's BeFinanciallyIndependent.com. Please, 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 if you don't go to the website, call 1-888-496-6845. Again, that's 1-888-496-6845. As well, if you're thinking about getting a quality Islamic graduate level education or doctoral education, please check out Bayan Islamic Graduate School. Again, that's Bayan Islamic Graduate School. I don't know their slogan, but I'll tell you this, they got scholarships. So you might want to go there and check them out. And even if you don't want to go, check out some of the lectures, some of the visiting teachers that they have. Great stuff, brothers and sisters. Listen, that's my show. You guys have been amazing. If you see a young Black kid, young Latino kid, young Native American kid, or a kid that's just having a hard time, You know what? Stop. Ask him how that day was. Give him a hug. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.